Welcome to the Goat's Gravy, the ultimate podcast tailored for young professionals navigating the dynamic world of sales and sales leadership. We are here to serve up a blend of mentorship and advice. In each episode, we dive deep into conversations with accomplished leaders and rising stars in the sales industry. Together, we explore their triumphs, challenges, and invaluable experiences. Our goal? To distill their insights into practical lessons that can seamlessly integrate into your own career journey. So whether you're a seasoned sales expert or just starting out, join us as we ladle out wisdom and inspiration, empowering you to excel in the ever-evolving landscape of sales. Onward we go. Hey, Demetri, good to see you.
What's happening, Bill? What's happening, Scott?
How you doing, man?
Hey,
you got Scotty in the house. Always a pleasure.
Hey, Billy, great to see you, bud.
All right, let's get right into this. Welcome to the Goat's Gravy podcast. Today, we have our guest in-house. Pretty exciting. And we are absolutely thrilled to be speaking with Bobby Herzberger.
Bobby!
Born and raised here in Chicagoland, whose journey spans from a standout high school athlete to the tech hubs of Austin, Texas. A business management graduate from the University of Missouri, Bobby started his professional career at Central Steel and Wire before making his mark in the tech world at EMC, living in Las Vegas. I'm sure there's some stories there. And that's also where he randomly met Scott Atwater, and we'll talk about that here shortly. After 9 successful selling years, in the last 4 working for Scott, Bobby is now a sales director at ServiceNow, where he leads the Illinois commercial region. Beyond work, he is active with a charity called Special Spaces, something close. Scotty and I have been part of that organization for the past decade, so it's a pleasure working with Bobby there. Away from work and his volunteering, Bobby's heart belongs to family and friends. Congratulations, by the way, Bobby, on your recent engagement.
Yeah,
Nicole.
appreciate
Very exciting.
Poor Nicole.
And so now we're ready to explore Bobby's journey from the football fields, the glory of football, to the tech scene, delving into the stories that have shaped this remarkable person that he is today. And let's learn from his wisdom and insights as a seller and now a first-time leader. Welcome, Bobby.
Gentlemen, fired up. Did you say I was a standout football star?
Was that the intro?
What position did you play?
I think I played receiver and safety. Yeah, receiver, safety, kick return, punt return. I don't know if I was standout. My coaches used to call me poor man's Jerry Rice because I could run a 5-second play, but I could do it all game.
Yeah,
so it was fine.
That's good.
But no, I appreciate it. I'm fired up to be here.
And Bobby, as we were writing the intro, the person that told me about your high school prowess, guess who it was?
Probably my mother.
Your dad.
Really?
Yeah. And he said it with a huge smile.
That's pretty cool.
He was a fan. I know that. He never missed a game. I'm surprised. My mom seems like she can't stop ever bragging about it. I'm surprised it didn't come from her.
No doubt.
Yeah.
So, Bobby, welcome. Fired up to have you here. Let's take us back. I kind of remember, like, we've been working together in some form or fashion for over 9 years, right? And then officially for about 5.
Mm-hmm.
So we met back in 2016. I don't know if you remember that. We were in Vegas. So, Billy, you mentioned the Vegas comment. That's where Bobby and I actually met. So, Bobby, we were networking through our, Christy and I, my wife, Christy and I know your parents.
Yep.
And your mom was like, you got to meet Bobby. And I said, I can't wait to meet him. So we're in Vegas kind of randomly. And I walked up poolside, if you remember this. And you get out of the pool. Back then, you were in shape. Right now, you're losing.
I'm a little softer now. I'm getting back at it.
So I said, hey, first things first, throw a shirt on. You're a tough guy. And then we went over to the gazebo and we had a little chat. So walk me back to 2016 and kind of what was going through your mind as you kind of thought about networking into me and kind of where were you at with your career?
Yeah. So to your point, was in Vegas, but that actually wasn't the plan. So at the time, I was working at Central Steel and Wire. I was covering the state of Minnesota for him, living in Minneapolis. I happened to be in San Francisco for one of my closest friends' birthdays. My plan was just to fly back to Minneapolis, and that was it. My mom was actually the one that convinced me, like, hey, you don't have anything going on. Just come to Vegas for a night or two.
Yep.
We're with the Atwaters. I think you've met them before. Just come to spend the night. Switch my flights, and that was, I didn't know it was going to be the biggest turning point in my career.
Yeah.
Because at the time, that wasn't the plan. I wasn't necessarily looking at getting into technology. I didn't know anything about technology. I was selling steel at the time. And I had other plans lined up and other things in motion. But getting to meet Scott and the sales guy that he is completely shifted my career trajectory. And I couldn't be more happy about it.
That's awesome. So you were at University of Missouri.
Yep.
And you said you had a plan. Right. And I know you at Central Steel and Wire. I want to say that was maybe networking in through one of your parents' friends, family friends.
Yep.
What was your plan? If tech wasn't on your radar screen, what did you think? Did you have a plan?
When I went to Mizzou, the reason I did is, number one, I wanted to do something different. So a lot of my high school friends were going to IU, Iowa, ISU, kind of the normal Naperville schools. Mizzou was a top journalism school in the nation. And I wanted to be an ESPN sportscaster. I wanted to be the next Stuart Scott, right?
Yeah.
So I went to Mizzou, told my parents that I was going to do journalism, and my dad said, "That's great. I'll help with business. I'm not helping with journalism." So I'm like, okay, I'm going to shift over to this line, which again, like, great decision. Once I graduated college, my first job I accepted was Echo Global Logistics. So my family's been in trucking and logistics my whole entire life. A day before my start date, I completely switched gears. To your point, networking with a family friend, I just wanted to do something different. Didn't necessarily want to follow in the footsteps of what my family did. Nothing against it. It's like I just wanted to make my own name. So ultimately, that's why I switched over and went to the steel industry. And I loved it, right, for the first couple of years. So no regrets. Learned a ton. First sales role, you always are. So I had a plan. I never really followed it, though.
Yeah.
You know?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just, if we can go back a little bit, both your parents were entrepreneurs, running two successful businesses. Talk about what it was like growing up with that, and the fact that you wanted to step out and do something different. I guess why is that? Why did you decide you wanted to do something completely different?
Looking at my dad and what he built, looking at my mom and what she was able to build, super inspiring. I actually give all the credit to my mom. She was the one that pushed me to go do my own thing. I think for the biggest reason was she was a little bit nervous of what that would do to my dad and I's relationship, right? She's like begging for me to go do something else because, my dad's one of my best friends. And when you mix family and money, and especially running a business together, could be super difficult. And if you've met my dad before too, like you'd understand why, me included. But I give full credit to her for pushing me to do something else and instilling that I can do whatever it is I want to do. I don't have to follow in someone's footsteps. There was a level of confidence that she gave me to do that.
Well, what were some of the key things that you kind of learned from both of them growing up that you carry forward today, whether it's attributes, skills? Yeah,
there's nothing. So I'll start from my dad. There's nothing that could beat out hard work. Right? There is absolutely no attribute or skill someone possesses that will beat hard work. And he instilled that, thankfully, to me and my brothers at a really, really young age. And then on my mom, like the level of empathy she has and the empathy she passed down to me, and being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and, for lack of a better term, treat the CEO and the janitor the same. Like that's what my mom embodies. So hard work and empathy are things that I attribute some of my success to, and something I'm constantly trying to work on.
Yeah. Could you dive in a little bit? Like I love your dad's story. Like your dad, I've gotten to know him over the years. Great guy. And talk about work ethic that you mentioned. Yeah. But can you I think our audience would find your dad's story pretty interesting as it relates to that hard work, because it does end up relating to what you're bringing to work every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So my pops grew up in the south side of Chicago in Cicero. His dad unfortunately passed when, he was at a young age, I think 12, 13 years old. So my nana was a single mother raising 3 kids. At a very early age, my dad decided school was not for me. So he tells the story. He went to a Catholic school, Brother Rice, and one of the sisters was coming down the hallway yelling at him with a ruler. He had did something to piss her off. He booked it, and that was the last time he was in school. It was his freshman year.
Yeah.
So came home, told my nana he was done with school at a young age of, can you imagine dropping out freshman year of high school? Craziness.
No.
They altered his birth certificate so we could work at the Arby's down the street. and he ran the Arby's. He still says to this day, if he stuck with it, he'd be CEO of Arby's. It's
awesome.
like not necessarily the chain you want to take over. I don't know how well they're doing, but saved up money, was able to buy his first truck. And from there, he was a truck driver for 15 to 20 years. And then ultimately one day was like, screw it. I think I could do it by myself. And luckily he had a mentor, Larry, who's Larry's Cartage is still around, was fully supportive of him, told him, you come to me with whatever you need, any questions you have. And as you build this thing, like, I'm here for you. And, thankfully you get some good bounces along the way and end up being successful.
Then you end up selling the company, exiting and doing great. That's a cool story. You mentioned mentorship and you mentioned Larry. Who are some of your mentors today?
Obviously your co-host here, Scotty. Back in 2016, I think was really my first official mentor. When I say official mentor, someone I stayed close to, someone I constantly checked in on. But on the flip side, like, it's the mentor's job as well to keep that going. You were super consistent with that. I have some folks at service now, like my counterpart in Colorado, Dave Bardo, my counterpart out in Ohio with Lada.
Yeah.
They are phenomenal, right? And my biggest thing I look for as a mentor, especially being a first-time leader, is I'm leaning on these folks. They have forgotten things I haven't even learned yet.
Sure.
Yeah.
So with that amount of experience, it's a no-brainer to lean on folks like that. So
how about in the early selling days, though? When you first started, you're in the steel industry. Did you seek out mentorship there? Did someone kind of embrace you and teach you the ropes? Or did you get some of those early learnings when you were a seller?
Yeah, I'd say one of the first people that took me under their arms, this guy, Charles Sapalo. He was a VP at the steel company we were working at. He was super close with the family friend that got me into the company. For whatever reason, he took a liking to me. And I was an inside seller at the time. He was the first one to bring me on a field gig. He was the first one to teach me the importance of, playing the political game, being super nice to people internally and being genuine with people that you're working with and treating everybody the exact same way. So I haven't talked to him in a while. And now that I'm talking about this, I probably should reach out, see how he's doing. Right. Yeah. But if I had to think of my first true mentor, that is probably Charles. Yeah.
And do you remember your first deal you got done, the first big sale you had? What was that? What did that look like?
He's still waiting.
11 years into my career, I'm still waiting for the whale. I don't remember the specific first deal. I do remember my first big account that we landed when I lived in Minneapolis, which was exhilarating, right? It's an account that someone was trying to get into for X amount of years, never had success there. That there is no better feeling than breaking in somewhere, knocking it down, and having your name in lights, right? Yeah. Like anyone who says they don't like a well-deserved attaboy, I'm going to call a liar.
Yeah. Salespeople want money and praise too.
Yeah.
How about the flip side? Any early hardships as you were trying to sell, especially in the steel industry, which most people think is a great gig to have. You can do really well, but it's really challenging.
100%. And the steel industry is incredibly cyclical. So every 7 years, it takes a massive dip, oil, gas, like whatever it is. So living in Minneapolis, I had a heavy agriculture customer base. So CNH Robinson was my number one customer. I moved out there and it was part of that recession dip with agriculture, which was incredibly difficult. And it's really hard to combat things like that, especially in steel. It's, hey, if they're not making tractors, there's no way to sell them steel. Like now it's a little bit different game we play with software, but when you're selling a commodity like that, it's incredibly difficult. So super humbling, right? Hot shot moving from Chicago to Minneapolis. You think you're going to crush it that first year. Not so much.
Yeah.
That was tough.
But it's also cool to see that, you leveraged a relationship. You got to meet Scott in Las Vegas, and then you made a decision to pivot your career. Maybe walk through what was the criteria you were thinking through when you made the decision to leave that first job and move into the tech space?
Yeah, I just think like even if you were to back it up. So my mindset when I graduated college was it doesn't matter where the opportunity is, I'll move for anything. So like when I graduated, fortunately, I had that mindset of like, it doesn't matter where I live. I'm not bound to one city. Like I'm going to go follow the opportunity. I still feel that way wholeheartedly. I'm not going anywhere, Scott.
Be easy.
Yeah. So it was all about opportunity and the ability to grow within a company. Like when I was, again, super thankful for my time at Central Steel and Wire, but it became super like I was super aware that the ceiling was much lower than what my aspirations were. Right. And like I said, I didn't know anything about technology. What I did is I leaned on someone I trusted, right? Sure. By way of good word from mom and dad, who obviously I trust better than anybody.
Mamas know.
Yeah. And then once you start learning about technology and you start diving it in, what Scotty did a really nice job at, and something I try to emulate, is don't just hear it from me. Let me get you in touch with folks that are maybe the same age as you, or the same career trajectory, or want the same things. Because, although Scotty and I are very close, we are very different in terms of demographic. Yeah. So just bringing additional resources to the table kind of opened my eyes to what the opportunity was.
Sure.
So as we got folks listening that are younger in career, you started in steel, you morphed to tech, and they might be thinking, where do I start? And can you kind of put yourself in, when you were 20 years old, you were to do it over again.
Yep.
Could be steel, could be tech. Billy's got medical sales, device sales. What should they be thinking about as it relates to that internship or first job? Does the industry really matter in your opinion now that you look back?
Now that I look back, it does.
Okay.
Like if you ask me when I first started, it's like, just get a sales role, go learn how to sell, go learn how to work with others, look how, leverage other resources. When I look back now, and if I could do it over when I was 20 years old, I would look at industries that are evolving.
Sure.
Right. Steel is steel. Mm-hmm. It has been the same for the last 100 years, and there's a good chance it's going to stay the same for the next 100. Not necessarily what I'd be looking for if I knew exactly what was out there. Think about the advancements in healthcare. Like, I don't want to be just partial to technology, how it's changing seemingly every day.
Absolutely.
Right? Especially in our space, things that are coming out.
Yep.
So you want to talk about growth and opportunity, you got to find an industry that has growth and opportunity.
Sure.
So that's how I look at it.
Well, will you maybe share some of the early experiences when you transitioned to sell technology? I guess, what were some of those early challenges from a skill perspective, and how did you develop yourself to become successful selling tech?
Yeah, so it was quite the learning curve. But what I did have in my back pocket was a few years experience. So when I went to EMC and went through the sales development program, I had real world experience. And although those are my coworkers, I'm a super competitive guy, right? Like, those are the folks that are also vying for the next promotion, right? Sure. So I had to beat them out. Yeah. So I leaned on just prior experience, having worked in an organization, politically, how to navigate that. But same thing, like leaning on others too. Like, although I was competing with these folks, they became some of my best friends very quickly. And thankfully for me, they were super talented. So it's like, yes, you were competing, but never be afraid to raise your hand and ask for help. Yeah. Like, being vulnerable is a reason that people are successful, in my opinion.
Was there a mistake along the way? Oh, go ahead, D.
You said something about vulnerability. I think that's like almost a secret in a lot of ways. That if you kind of tap into it, something magic happens in the sales process. Even if you're working with a tough prospect, but like, how have you leveraged vulnerability? I think that's something a lot of younger people struggle with, specifically.
Yeah, younger. Yeah, especially with sales folks, right? We have an ego. We can do it ourselves. We can muscle our way through it.
You do.
I have quite the ego, but I keep it tamed, in my opinion. No, it's, and when I say being vulnerable, it's the willingness to ask for help, and understanding that when you ask for help, it's not a weakness, right? It's you're just trying to make yourself better. I think it's super powerful. There's a piece of it that's self-aware too. Like, sure. I know where my downfalls are. I know where I do not excel. And that's why I lean on other people to fill those gaps.
Yeah, it's absolutely got to be resourceful. We've talked about that before.
Just my 2 cents on D. I think that's a good question, because a lot of sales folks do have egos. Mm-hmm. Most of us, Billy included. And to be vulnerable, to me, Billy, I don't know what your thought, but I think that is an interesting comment. And to me, it's, what are you doing to enable yourself to get better around the basics, right? And I don't know how many times I have this conversation when I'm interviewing people, and what are you doing to evolve yourself? And that can somewhat be vulnerable, right? Meaning that you don't know everything. You're not chasing the next deal, and you're really working on yourself and the basics. And Bobby, where do you get that today? Like, who do you lean on to get the basics? And even in your current role, do you have the time to even think through man, these are the basics I got to work on, because that's what I struggle with.
Yeah. Finding time to reflect.
Yeah.
Like it's near impossible. We're in such a fast paced world. Then you throw your personal life into the mix. It's like, how the heck do you sit down for a second and think? It's everyone around you, right? So it's not just the people I work for. It's the people that work for me as well. Like sure. I don't go into any conversation thinking I have the answers. I have a lot of people on my team who I truly believe were much better at the role than I was.
Yeah.
So put hierarchy aside, you should be leaning on everyone around you. Because if you're not, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And I think that's why you're going to be really successful as a leader, because that when you're vulnerable, even in a selling role, right, you're going to do the same with your team. And I think when they know that, that's a speed of trust, right? Mm-hmm. They know that you're not always going to have the answers, or you're going to be patient. We talked about this last week, staying in the pocket and being patient with your team. But I always say, you look at professional athletes, they are always practicing their craft. They're always working out. Golfers are at the range constantly. It should be no different for your career, right? Whether it's reading leadership books, studying leadership concepts, selling books, whatever it is. But I remember early on in my sales career, I had a leader that was, he was constantly calling me out of the blue and just doing a role play. He'd call me as if he was a physician interested in the product.
Love that.
Throw me right into a role play. He told me not to listen to sports radio when I'm driving between accounts, that's when I should be practicing my pitches and calling and doing discovery questions with different reps. All those things really helped.
I have a question real quick. What are your thoughts on that? About, hey, don't listen to anything unwork related on the way to a big meeting? Because I think I feel differently, but I would say early on for me, that actually helped me. Mm-hmm. I think I started everyone is busy. You're always on the go. I think it's go slow to go fast. But when you get more comfortable and you've been somewhere for a while and you know what you're doing, you know the product really well, I actually think sometimes it's good to escape. If you're always on, always in, I think sometimes you can overthink things. And so I'm a fan actually now of walking away. I mean, I'll do, you're on so many Zooms now, especially as a leader. Yeah. There's days where I'll just talk to my team on one-on-ones and say, let's do these as a walk. I'm going to leave the house and get out in the neighborhood and walk around just to change the scenery, change the environment. So I actually am okay. I think if you're new and you're in the beginning of your career and you're just learning, yeah, I think you got to be all in until you get really confident. Yeah, because the reason I ask is I agree with you. Like, I think it's good to have an escape. Like, we are in preparation for a big meeting. Like, we already know there's going to be nerves in the meeting. Yep. No need to add additional nerves before, right? Sure. Barring you did the right prep before. But and you just made a comment. I was with one of my buddies this morning who's a sales leader at another software company, and it doesn't matter what time of the day. Like, you need to make sure your cup's full. And if you're always on, it's a really good way to drain your gas tank. Yeah. And if your gas tank is drained, you're screwed. You're not going to perform at the highest ability. So being able to just turn it off for a second for me is super important.
Yeah. It probably dovetails into that enablement. In our prep, we're kind of chatting through how you enable yourself. Because for me, I'm a podcast guy, and I know, Bobby, you are as well. Yeah. But, when I'm working out, and believe it or not, I still work out, Billy. So I'll
looking good.
Beat you to the punch there. But, I like to find leisure and something that stimulates me intellectually, whether it's sales related or it's Joe Rogan talking about hunting bear or deer or whatever he's doing. I just think it is important to take a break and find your own style of entertainment. What do you do to kind of both enable and to chill? Are they one and the same, or do you separate them?
Listen, they're one and the same in some instances, but I do separate them. So I do have my Better Myself podcast, because to Scotty's point, I'm a big podcast guy, and that's, All In is one of my favorite podcasts. My buddy runs a podcast called Grit, which I think I've introed you to. Yeah, it's really, really great, super insightful. And then on the flip side, I have, golf influencer podcasts where that's all they talk is junk for an hour. And I need that, right? I need, because they're relatable to me on my personal side of the house. Like, weirdly enough too, like when I was working out this morning, like I sift through cooking videos on YouTube, which I've become weirdly addicted to.
A secret hobby of yours anyways?
It's a secret hobby of mine. My fiance appreciates it, but I love it. And I got multiple different YouTube channels of just crazy recipes. And they don't look or turn out as good, but I'm learning. I'm learning. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I tell you, early in my career, I will say, even when we were relocated for a job to Chicago, I was always on. And even when I was home, if I wasn't traveling, like my wife knew when we were at the dinner table if I wasn't engaged, right? Because I'm thinking about things, I'm checking the phone, emails. Yeah. And it took me a long time to really teach myself that it's okay to walk away sometimes and find those things that are going to re-energize you. And now I'd say the biggest thing that I've changed in my career is I'm just very intentional about everything I do. I think we've talked about this. There's a book I love called Essentialism. And it's really, there's an art, right, to really just prioritizing the things that really matter.
Yeah.
But making sure you're finding time for yourself, for your family, and doing those things. And I find now that I've never lost my work edge by not constantly being on and being able to walk away, think of other things, do other things, spend time with the kids, and then plug right back in. So as you've transitioned now into a new leadership role, how have you managed that balance? Because obviously there's a lot more on your plate as a manager.
Yeah. And I laugh because it was one of the first, I guess, conversations or help needed that I came to Scotty with was my work-life balance was thrown completely out of whack. I was doing something for 4.5 years. And if you do anything for that long, you just get in a really smooth rhythm. Yeah. I take this new role, new responsibilities, trying to ramp, and that is completely thrown off. So yeah, I look at it a little bit differently. Like work-life balance to me doesn't make sense. Like, because when I hear work-life balance, that's you put work in the front or family in the front. Yeah. There's no separation between the two. I look at it as like, how can you best integrate work life together? Right. Yeah. So like, for instance, and I tell my fiance this all the time, and thankfully she gets it. Like we went to Paris for a friend's wedding. She knows that I won't be fully present with her unless I have a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the business. Yeah. That's just who I am and it's how I'm wired. And because we have that understanding, it doesn't get in the way. Like I can log on, I call it releasing the pressure valve. And I got that from Jude. It's like, I am going to be pensed up unless I at least know what's going on. Now, when we're out to dinner, it's phones in the pocket. Like there are different things, but back to my first kind of struggle with Scotty, I stopped taking care of myself. So I am head first into the business. I'm not working out. I'm not sleeping great. I'm not spending quality time with my friends' family. That started to get to me personally. Now, I hope it didn't reflect in my work. But back to my comment before, like my cup was empty. Yeah. So I had to start doing things to fill up my own cup. And I think that makes me a better person in not only work, but my relationships as well. So I'm still figuring it out. I don't have the answer. Yeah. I don't think anyone really does, but it's a work in progress, like always.
I think it depends on the timing, right? Bobby, Billy, if you can believe this, went to Paris at the end of a quarter.
You allowed that, even for a wedding.
I didn't like it. And I talked to his buddy who actually got married. I met him at the Special Spaces event. And I said, you're the one to plan a wedding at the end of a quarter. Now, Bobby keeping his, finger on the pulse of the business does make sense, I think, in that instance. But I kind of think back to one of my mentors, Tim Frank. Mm-hmm. And he says, end of the quarter, all bets are off, right? We're working around the clock, and that's just what we do. We chose this profession. But he always took vacation right at the beginning of the next quarter.
Yeah.
And he said, Scott, when you take a vacation, I don't want to hear from you. You got to recharge. Yeah. If you don't recharge, you're not the better version of yourself or your family and your team. You're going to get this guy or gal that's just beat up. And that's just, they're not able to provide guidance, so that was his kind of perspective.
Yeah.
So, something I think I struggle with, like even this week alone, how have you guys, you guys have really high capacity roles, right? How specifically you, Bobby, like how are you, let's say there's a big deal or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like just think about the most heightened moments of like working in the business. Like how do you detach? Like I think that's kind of where we're headed towards is like, how do you create this like level of like sanity in your life to not, be up at the butt crack of dawn thinking about it?
It's a good question because I'm still trying to figure out how to keep sanity during high pressure situations. No, like I'll point to an example earlier this year. The team and I were working on a very, very large new logo deal, and we were working till 1 a.m. But what we were doing is we were making it fun. So all of our significant others are asleep. we're in the kitchen trying to be quiet, putting presentations together, but we're having fun doing it. We're keeping it light. We're trying to keep the energy light. Again, it's easier said than done, but at the end of the day, to Scotty's point, like we signed up for this. Like we know what we signed up for when we got into sales. And if you don't understand that, maybe it's not the right thing for you, and that's totally fine. Like there's so many other professions that don't have these crazy hours. And again, I was talking to my buddy this morning, and it's like I do not work an 8 to 5 job, and thank goodness I don't, because I don't think I would be successful punching in and punching out at certain times. Like I work when the work needs to get done. I go take time for myself when I know I need it. Right. And I don't care if my team goes and does a Peloton at noon or 5 p.m. or it doesn't matter. As long as the work's done, that's what we signed up for.
Yeah.
So
I think that's really good. And I think it's important too as a new leader, because as you figure yourself out, right, you've got eyeballs watching you and how you manage things and what your expectations are of yourself, let alone for the team. I know it's interesting. Scott and I've spent a lot of spring breaks together where our families are at the beach hanging out with, and all of our friends are, just never understand the world we live in, but there are a lot of them don't. But we were always in the hotel room grinding it out, or we'd be at a Starbucks, tables next to each other, just driving the end of a quarter. But there's times where you have to step away and you make it work. I think for my team, what I've learned is if I have someone on vacation, I really try never to disturb them. It's got to be an emergency if I'm going to reach out. I've changed my, I try not to do a lot of email traffic on the weekend. I'll actually go to a library where it's quiet. I'll spend 2 hours to get caught up in things, but I'll turn my email off and just respond, and then turn it up on Monday morning, so people don't feel that need or that urge. I guess, have you picked up on any any early lessons of how you can help your team find some balance while also, working to get deals done?
What I will say about the point you just made, and Scotty made it too, like when Tim Frank, he gave the example, Tim's like, Scott, I don't want to hear from you.
Yeah.
You know what would kill that is it when Timmy was out and you heard from him. Yeah. Like, okay, so maybe do I follow his actions or do I follow what he's telling me? So like to your point, like when you're off and you don't want to bug your team, like it comes from the top, and that gives them the level of comfort to actually then decompress. Because if your boss saying one thing and doing the other, that's setting a really bad example. Good point.
Totally agree.
So it's super important that you're following what you're saying too in those cases.
So Bobby, I want to change gears real quick.
Yeah.
And a lot of our listeners might have a sales role today, individual contributor, and they're considering leadership, right? And you and I got to work through that process together. So for our audience out there, as they're considering a leadership role, we've all seen examples where maybe some folks should have stayed in sales. They would have been more successful. Mm-hmm. Some people are better leaders than they were carrying the bag, right? How did you look at that? And any thoughts thinking back? Did you make the right decision? Or what should some of our audience be thinking about as they're considering that transition?
Yeah. So one of the best pieces of advice I got when thinking about leadership was if your why is because it's the next step in the process of my sales journey, totally wrong reason. Like if you're doing it because you're like, yeah, I go from a BDR to an inside rep to a field rep to it, blah, 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 wrong reason, right? So, and that was candidly my reason. I'm like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to carry a bag, then go be a leader, then be a VP. So once that was out the window, I really had to give it some thought on the why. And, what made me gravitate towards a leadership role was when I started mentoring people.
Sure.
And I saw the gratification that I had for myself when I started helping others. I loved it. Now, when getting into leadership, like you are a resource. That is what I believe. I am a resource for the reps that work for me, 100%. My name shouldn't be in lights. It should be them, right? So as long as you could kind of taper that ego that we talked about and know that you're just another piece in the wheel, I think you'll be super successful. I try to be a servant leader. I've been doing it for 11 months, so I have no idea how I'm doing at it, but I'm going to consistently try to get better. And as long as you love helping people, love developing people, retaining talent, it could be a good fit.
Yeah. Well, you're almost at that 12-month mark, so I think doing a 360 would be helpful.
Yeah, I've got some feedback for him.
He doesn't hold back punches either. That I know.
But I like that. So you've figured out your style. At least you kind of consider yourself a servant leadership. So talk a little bit about that. Where did that come from? Who do you follow? Who do you look up to as a leader? Where you feel like you can take those lessons and apply them to your own team?
I have been crazy fortunate with the people that I've been surrounded by. So like when I first came to ServiceNow, you had Chelsea and Tommy, 2 seasoned ServiceNow sales reps. They did not have to help me, but they chose to, right? And those kinds of things stick in my mind. And it's even like when I start mentoring someone, a young person in their career, my only ask to them is pay it forward. Yeah. When you have an opportunity to go mentor someone, jump all over it. Because as long as we all agree to continue to develop the future generations, like we're all going to be better for it. But yeah, like I said, I've been lucky. People have been willing to help me. So I'm a very big believer that life is simple: do good, be good, get good. So yeah, it's just the people I'm surrounded by.
Do you have in the past year just an example of where maybe you didn't lead so well or you made a mistake, and how did you learn from that?
You want me to answer that?
I should ask you.
I do think Scotty would have a better perspective. Yeah. I don't have an example off the top of my head. I'll tell you what I struggled with though, is when I went from being an IC to a leader, it's your gut instinct to suggest or tell folks to do it the way you did. That to me is a huge no-no. Yeah. You also can't manage every person the same. Like I thought I knew my team because I knew them as counterparts. I didn't actually understand how they ran the business. And I'm not saying one person does it better than the other. They're just different. So I have been super conscious of holding back certain words like, hey, you should do this, versus like, hey, here's something I suggest. Like those little really fine tunes make a big world of difference when giving feedback or giving help and direction. So I can't point to a certain scenario. I'm sure there's a bunch.
You're learning though. It sounds like you got a good boss, a good mentor.
Oh yeah,
phenomenal boss.
Not you.
Yeah.
It made me think of something. Hungry and humble. That's something we talk about at ServiceNow quite a bit, and that's coming from Bill McDermott. So I got an opportunity to work with Bill on an opportunity. He sends me a note back, and he's so good at this. And he said, "No problem. That's my job. Looking forward to continuing to run alongside you." And this is coming from arguably the top CEO in all of tech.
Yeah.
Right. So when he is setting that type of an example, and he made me think through that, are you willing to run along people, right? To coach, and do you like coaching? So I loved your perspective, Bobby, on why get into leadership, because you enjoy to coach.
Yep. And
how do you coach best? You better be in the fire with your team. Right. And Bill epitomizes, I think, every bit of that.
I have a question. Great. Just because, I don't know. I'm thinking about the person that's hearing this episode and is like, dang it, like my boss is not running alongside of me. What do we say to them right now? Like this is a person that's upset and just almost wanting to quit.
Yeah. My guidance would be like, you
come to ServiceNow.
We're hiring. Is that person giving those folks feedback? I feel like people pull back punches when they're trying to give feedback up, but like that is something I over communicate with my team. Like as we're rolling into next year and I'm starting to plan for next year, I got lunches scheduled with each one of my reps, and my ask to them coming into that lunch is, do not hold back punches. I need legitimate feedback to make this whole thing better. The second you lose the ability to give feedback, you lose the freaking team, in my opinion. So,
yeah, and I guess what I'd just piggybacking off of that, I think the attitude, if you're a seller and you have someone you're reporting to that you don't feel is supportive or engaged, I think you owe it to yourself to go try to drive that alignment. If it's not there, I think having those tougher conversations where you maybe drive a couple goals, make sure you're on the same page. And then what you said earlier, I think we talked about grit last week, but that work ethic, you can prove yourself just with your performance, right? If you don't have that support, it's not there. Try to drive that alignment with that individual or find another leader in the organization. I'll never forget in one of my roles, I was an area sales director. There was another area sales director in another part of the country. He had someone on his team. They just didn't click. And this guy reached out to me and asked for mentorship and how to work through that. And then ultimately I went and bridged that relationship with my peer. And he loved that I was working with this guy because he wasn't super excited, didn't think the guy was going to be able to get where he needed to go. Yeah. And this guy figured it out. So I do think just take ownership of your journey to try to drive that alignment.
Yeah. And D, you ask a good question. The answer may be you want to roll out and do something different, right? But before you do that, I love hiring people that have grinded through a portion of their career because there's no easy start. So Bobby, as you ramp into this role, the 9 months, 12 months have been really tough for you, right? And you're learning a ton. So I like to look for people, D, that are willing to find a solution to the problem. And Billy, to your point, that solution may be finding another leader that's more open-minded and joining forces and creating maybe a solution for the entire team. That's not only going to help him or her, but that's going to help the entire team grow. If you can do that and have success, you may be proving to yourself you should stay. Now, if you can't, you bring this best practice to your leader, and this question that might be managing by spreadsheet, managing behind the desk, never in the field. If that doesn't change, then maybe it's part of the culture that person is deciding to build. That may be an idea for you to exit. But my guidance to our audience is tough it out, grind it out. You've made a commitment. You made a commitment to yourself or at least to stick it out for, I like to say, I like that 3-year term personally, but that's just me. But find a solution through leveraging other talent within the organization or externally.
Right.
Yeah. And like Scotty brings up a great point. My career at ServiceNow was not all rainbows and sunshines. There was rough sledding for 2.5 years there, to the point where I was starting to peek my head outside those 4 walls because I just didn't think I could do it. I was unhappy with my current situation, but thank God I grinded it out, right? And
so talk about that though. What specifically did you do?
In terms of grinding it out?
Yeah, just what you were feeling this way. You started to open your ears to other opportunities. I guess what was the catalyst to stay? How did you get yourself over that hump of wanting to exit?
Yeah, number one, and Scotty just mentioned and gave advice on what to do, is I went outside of my team and found other leaders in the business that I can get a perspective from, right? And I think that made me say, like, it clicked. It's like, okay, you're not crazy. Maybe some of the things that you're going through right now or dealing with are abnormal. Here are some different ways to combat it. Because I was still super young in my sales career. I didn't know how. I again started having success, which obviously makes everybody happier as we're clean driven. So thank goodness for that. But then, Scotty did also bring in a leader within Chicago. It was an outside hire, had no familiarity with ServiceNow. And I think that's exactly what we needed, someone to come help change the culture. And that's Johnny Banish, who you might know. Yeah. And he completely turned the ship around. And I give him a lot of credit. I really do believe the reason I'm still here is because I then had a great leader who I respected and can learn from. So I'm also a big believer that people do not leave companies, they leave leaders.
Well, something you mentioned yesterday, I agree with that, by the way. You mentioned yesterday, and we did a little pre-call, is just attitude and activity. Will you expand on that a little bit?
That's the Scotty special, maybe. Yeah. Attitude and activity. It's the 2 things you can control in life, right? Like there are going to be a million different things, especially through a sales cycle, that are thrown your way that you just don't have control over, right? So we'll start with activity. Like, are you doing the right things? Are you running the playbook? Are you following the go-to-market? If you are, good things will follow. Like that has been proven over and over and over again. And then attitude. Like you can drag your feet. You can say, why me, poor me. Or you can say, why not me? Like that's something Bill McDermott says. Like people say, why me? I say, why not me? It's just all around a mindset. You had a guest on your podcast and I wrote it down, but essentially it takes the exact same I wrote a quote down. It takes the same mindset for anxiety and what was it? Optimism. I can't remember the quote exactly, but
that's right.
It's totally true.
Same amount of energy, whether anxiety or optimism.
It goes back. It takes actually more muscles in your face to frown than it is to smile. Like, think about that, right? So why not freaking smile? It's easier. So I'm a big believer in
the attitude piece. And I've been doing some interviewing over the last several months, a lot of interviewing. And I do listen for that. In the first 5 minutes, what are you picking up on the candidate? The A players, at least in my opinion, their curiosity. And for our listeners out there, be curious. Get your questions tight. Write them down. If you're in an interview type of situation, that is what I think A players are going to be doing. Versus, well, my current situation, here are the 3 reasons why we're failing. Like, people will say that. And I'm thinking to myself, you're going to bring your problems into this first 5 minutes of the interview? It's like,
it's an interview, not a therapy session.
I feel like I'm being put on. I feel like it's a hoax.
Yeah.
So, but the A players that I've whittled down to, at least in this recent search, they are hammering me with curiosity. And I think that does connect to attitude and activity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's good energy. Billy, no one's got better energy than you, sometimes a little too much. But it's good energy and being inquisitive and being curious. And that's going to breed the activity that we need, that positive activity.
Yeah.
So it's just, for our listeners out there, be very careful when you're talking to people. Check your attitude, make sure you're in a good frame of mind, be inquisitive, and have that good energy and activity, and good things will happen.
One thing that I have loved so I'm also currently interviewing we're expanding the team, which is amazing. And I'm talking to folks who have been laid off by some of the other large tech companies. One thing that I'm looking for, are they bad-mouthing their past company?
True.
And if they're not bad-mouthing them, like, hey, I'm super grateful, unbelievable opportunity, learned a ton. Like, that is a great attitude to have, versus the person's like, well, it's BS. I was a top performer. How can they do this to me? Screw them. I want them to have a chip on their shoulder, but also, like, are they being respectful and graceful with their exit with the prior company? And so that's one thing I'm looking at. I'm super impressed by some of these people, like the level of positivity they have after a life-changing event.
Right. Yeah. Well, that just demonstrates, how they show up, especially for an interview. Right? This is really important. It's your career. If they're not bringing their best, right, what are they going to do on a challenging day, right, when they're selling for you? I often talk to my group about, look, you have a choice every day when it comes to the attitude, and how you show up does matter. If you find yourself part of those conversations, I call them the swamp draggers, where it's the negativity and people are dragging you into the swamp. And look, we all have bad days. You have to vent sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you are always pointing to all the flaws, I've been in startups, I've been in really large companies. There's no perfect environment, right? Yep. They're all going to have their challenges. And so at the end of the day, you have to decide, do you want to be someone that's going to always bring solutions forward and be a problem solver, or you don't let the negativity get to you and bring others down? And so I do challenge anyone coming into our organization, and I talked to them about it in the interview, is that it's important that we hire people for energy, not hyper like myself, but more showing up with an attitude of, I will figure this out, or I get to do this job, versus I have to go do this. I have to go do another report. I got to go do this meeting. And so I think that's really important. Now that you're leading right now, I guess, do you have any scenarios that you want to share that maybe has a bad scenario with an interview candidate, or someone that's blown you away that you've hired, and any of those early learnings from just the interview game?
Just constantly learning. And it was actually part of my interview process when coming into this role. That's something that I wanted to revamp, actually, was our interview process, having gone through some other ones, and just being more prescriptive and intentional on what we're looking for, and the different activities we're putting these folks through. Thankfully, I haven't had any bad experiences, but I've also had some really, really good ones. And what I will say that I have a challenge with is, so we hired a gal earlier this year. We also had a rock star external folk that we were looking at. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be to let someone else down that I truly thought can do the job. Yeah. And then taking it a step further, like, how do you deliver bad news to someone you truly believe deserves the job, and then continue that relationship?
Yeah.
Candidly, I haven't talked to that candidate since then.
Yeah.
which is shame on me, right? Because you should always be trying to keep your bench warm. So it's something I'm still working on. It's how do you deliver bad news, but continue to keep that person in mind for the next surprise or the next promotion on your team, so on and so forth. So,
Billy, I've got a good example with Bobby. He interviewed, and just a quick interviewing tip since we're chatting about it. Do you have the ability to bring A players to the table? Do you have the ability to bring people better than you? And I have this concept of, I want to diversify my leadership team. That doesn't mean what you look like, where you grew up, where you were born. That means overall diversification, because some of the gaps on your team that you may have. And do these folks, are they true A players that are helping filling the gap of the diversification of that leadership team? So Bobby comes in, he had the luxury of going last. I remember it, 9 months ago. And all the other candidates sat down. Like, we're in a big conference room, everyone's sitting down, including me, taking notes. And the energy for the prior 3 candidates was probably 7 out of 10, maybe an 8, maybe a 6. And then Bobby comes in. And this dude was shot out of a cannon. And he was standing up and he was owned the room and he was walking back and forth. So all of a sudden, everyone else is sitting down and Bobby's, standing and pacing in a good way. And he just brought that energy up from that 7 to the 10. So instantaneously, we talk about energy, positive energy, boom, he nailed it. So he had our attention right out of the gates, and he continued that energy throughout the whole interview. Bobby leaves, we sit down, and we kind of started laughing. I'm like, this dude literally got shot out of a cannon. And we were so engrossed in the conversation and excited for some of the messaging that he was delivering. So well done there, Bobby. And Billy, awesome. Before we go to our quick hits, right, I think the concept of giving back, whether an individual contributor, whatever organization you're in, I think the 3 of us are pretty passionate about that, right? And I think as far as we're talking about getting engrossed in work, what's a way that we can not get engrossed in work 100% of our time and give back to a cause that we're all passionate about? So, Bobby, you gravitated to this at a fair. I mean, you're what, 30?
31.
You're 31, right? It took me a while, Billy, to actually get attached to an organization and go all in. And I wish I did it earlier. I really do, because it's so much fun to give back. So how did you get introduced to Special Spaces, and what are some of the things that you're doing to give back?
Yeah, so we got introduced through Scotty. Actually, my little brother was the first one that started doing charity work with Scotty, doing room makeovers. At that point, he then pulled my parents in with the help of Scotty. My parents were starting to do these room makeovers as well, and I just participated, right? It's like my mom's like, hey, we need a couple more hands for this charity that we're getting involved in. And during the day, not only is it fun, but when you actually do the reveal and you see what other people are dealing with, and you start to realize how freaking lucky you really are and how little your problems really are, at that point, it becomes a no-brainer. Like, I've talked to Kelly Knox, and I've gotten more ingrained in Special Spaces over the last year. She asked, like, why do you want to be on the board? It's like, because I've had a silver spoon up my rear for my whole entire life. I really haven't had to deal with some of the challenges when it relates to anything. And then you see these poor kids were dealt a bad hand. Yeah. That's all it was. They did nothing to deserve it. So it's a no-brainer for me. And listen, we're not, for Special Spaces, as you guys know, we're not trying to cure the disease, but we're just trying to make someone's life better for at least a day.
Sure.
And to me, that's a super, super powerful message. Like I said at the Special Spaces event, like the small amount of resources and time that we have to dedicate to make a massive difference, it's a no-brainer. So,
yeah. And one thing, just for the audience, Special Spaces, it's a great charity. We do room makeovers for kids battling cancer. So we'll have Kelly Knox on an episode soon, but so we'll learn more about that. She's outstanding. Outstanding.
Talk about energy.
You two, the thing might explode.
Whoa. That's right. So, but I will tell you, I have found whatever that is, I will say, I think it's important when you're a leader and you've got your team. I have found anywhere I've been, when we do a group activity outside of your regular, work environment, it's just a great way to get to know people outside of work. And I've found the Special Spaces has been a great avenue for me with my teams to do team building. You go do a room makeover together, you go out afterwards and hang out. And but finding those type of opportunities, and even if you're a seller, bring something to the table where you get your team involved and go do something where you give back as a team. It's amazing how you see people come together, and it just, talk about speed of trust. Everyone's doing something that they can be passionate about outside of the selling arena.
Yeah. And we did do an event back in April together as a team. Yeah. So we went out, did a room makeover. We closed the largest deal in commercial history that day.
That's awesome.
So not only were we going out giving back, we all got to celebrate together with the extended team, which was pretty sweet. And, one of you just made a comment, like, it's so cool that a 31-year-old's giving back. I think the exact same thing about the junior board. Like, we have these Sunday calls with 17, 18-year-olds who are still in high school who should be chasing boys and girls and worry about sports in college, and they're investing their time. So same thing from my end. It's crazy to see, because when I was 17, 18 years old, I had a lot of other things on my mind than giving back. So it's cool to see that from my perspective too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something that's always been important to Scott and I to try to teach our children to be generous and give back. And so that was part of the fuel to start this junior board. And it's been great to get kids involved, and hopefully that continues. But all right, Demetri, I think it's about time. We're going to go do our quick hits with Bobby. You want to take over?
Let's do it, Bobby. So basically, our goal is really just to get just some quick insight on just a few different areas. We're not going to go through every quick hit, but seems like we were really talking about just this idea of self-development and how you kind of take care of yourself as you're building your career. And so for the listeners, like, just kind of give them a little overview of like just your belief system about self-development as a professional.
Imperative, super, super important. Every single person, including like a Bill McDermott, has to be constantly improving yourself, or they're going to get replaced. And that's a couple different ways. So it's not only our craft, but it's what are you doing for yourself in terms of development. When I am getting my workouts in, when I'm doing the sauna, the cold plunge, it 100% correlates to my professional life. So like I mentioned, consistently trying to fill your cup, whether that's through a podcast, a book, talking to your resources, your friends, family, whatever it is, constantly be trying to learn.
Beautiful. Selling to power. We're going to, at the end of the day, if you're in sales, you're going to talk to a lot of people with, that hold the purse string, is what I like to say. How do you build trust and get them to ease off the gas of holding that power frame when you're talking to them?
Yeah, selling to power is critical. I laugh because that's the number one thing Scotty talks about during deal reviews and account plans. So it's not only getting to power, in my opinion, it's aligning the right power from our side. So executive alignment from ServiceNow to XYZ customer, critical. The other piece that I think is important about selling to power is how are you maintaining that relationship post-sale? A really, really good example of that is a CIO at a large law firm that we sold. There is no deal on the table, yet Scotty's at his house spending Thanksgiving with him and his family. Like, that is the stuff that makes a difference and moves the needle for the next opportunity next year.
Can I share the sidebar story, or you want me to keep
sure
here? We'll save it for another day, but there's a funny story there. Yeah. I agree with that.
Last but not least, interviewing. Like, what's the one thing that makes you stand out, you think, for somebody listening?
Activity and attitude. I think we talked about it before. And ultimately, are you going to be a culture fit? Because that's a really big piece that's important to both sides, right? You could be an A player, stud guy or gal coming into a role, but if you don't think you'll be a good culture fit, probably not the right opportunity. Vice versa, you're interviewing someone, they may be a stud, but if you don't believe they're going to be the right culture fit, ultimately it's going to hurt the team.
Beautiful. Well, that's the quick hits. Giving it back to you guys.
Love it.
Listen, Bobby, it's been great having you. As I told you yesterday, I think we're gonna want to have you as a repeat person to join and bring your wisdom as you accelerate through your career. It's been really fun to hear about all your successes. I will say this, Scotty brags about you quite a bit. So whenever we're together, I know he's hard on you, but he also brags a lot about you. So
it's like my dad.
You're proud. Scott's proud, but you're doing an awesome job. And I think for people out there that are early in your selling career, you can sell forever and have a phenomenal career. You decide you want to go the leadership track, right? I agree with Bobby. You got to make sure you're passionate about people and hanging with people. But he's 1 year into this leadership journey, so I'm sure when we get him back here in 6 months, there'll be some new stories and new wisdom to share. But we really enjoyed it.
I loved it. I appreciate you guys coming on. If you ever need a co-host, Scotty Sticker time, you tap me in. But no, it's been a blast, and I appreciate the kind words. And like I always do, I give 100% of the credit to the people that raised me, the people I'm surrounded by. And my last piece of advice is the quicker you realize you don't have all the answers, the more successful you're going to be. So yeah, I'm just trying to learn. And super lucky.
Awesome. And maybe we end off this podcast with a shout out to Bobby and his entire team, right? End of November. It was actually December 1st, if we're being technical.
Yeah.
Hit his number for the year as a first time leader, which is unbelievable. Well done to you and your team, and loved having you on, and continued success to you.
Fired up for the next one, boys.
Right.
Thanks.
Thanks, D.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Goat's Gravy. We've shared some awesome insights and strategies aimed at enhancing your journey in sales. And the conversation does not have to stop here. So be sure to follow us on social media at The Goat's Gravy and explore more at thegoatsgravy.com. Your journey towards sales mastery is ongoing, and we're here to support you at every step. So thank you for tuning in today. Stay curious, stay driven, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.